Hi guys, it's Jenny. So today's video is going to be a true crime video, and today's is going to be a solved missing persons case. I don't think I've ever done a solved missing persons case before, so I'm really excited about this one. However, this case is pretty dark. It was quite tough to research, but I just found it so interesting, so I really wanted to share it with you guys. But yeah, it's quite a dark case, so yeah, just you be warned, I guess. So before I start, I just wanted to say my usual disclaimer. I mean absolutely no harm or disrespect to anybody involved in this case. This is simply information that I have found online and I'm just putting together into one video to share to you guys. So I'm gonna kind of be telling this story a little bit differently to any other like missing persons case or solved missing persons case that you may have seen on YouTube. You're going to find out the abductor, is that the right word? The person that abducted someone, you're going to find him out pretty early on, but that is just the only way really to tell this story, so yeah, I hope you don't mind that. So Elisabeth Fritzl was born on April 6th, 1966 in Amstetten, Austria. Her parents were Rosemary and Joseph Fritzl, and she was actually one of 7 children, so she had 2 brothers and 4 sisters. So Elisabeth actually had a pretty rough upbringing. She was physically and sexually abused by her father from a very young age. I think around 11 years old is when it started, but I couldn't find anywhere online whether this was happening to all of the children in the family or if it was just Elisabeth. But when she was 15 and had completed compulsory education, so she no longer had to be in education, she actually signed up to a course to train to be a waitress. So in January of 1983, when she was around 17 years old, she actually ran away from home. She went to Vienna to go stay with a friend that she knew from work, and within 3 weeks she was actually found by the police and returned home to her parents. She actually finished her training course to become a waitress in mid-1984 and was shortly after offered a waitressing job in the nearby city of Linz. So on August 28, 1984, Joseph Fritzl asked his daughter Elisabeth, who was 18 at the time, to come down to the basement to help him fit a door in place. So of course she agreed and went down with him. So after Elisabeth helped him fit the door in place, she held the door up whilst he fitted the hinges to the wall, I guess. He held an ether-soaked towel to her face until she was knocked unconscious. And when I looked up what ether was, it just kind of came up that it was like a highly flammable, dangerous substance, which I guess is something very toxic when you breathe it in, so that's why she was knocked unconscious. So Joseph then dragged Elisabeth's unconscious body down to the basement. So Joseph had actually been redoing the basement for years for the sole purpose of keeping Elisabeth captive down in the basement. So he had been planning this for years, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the whole building of the basement a bit later on, but just to give you an idea of how complex this basement was and how much he thought through about how to keep her trapped there. You actually had to go through a series of like 5 to 8 doors to actually get to where Elisabeth was being held. So her mother soon got worried, of course, because she couldn't get a hold of Elisabeth. No one knew where she was. I think it had been a few hours at this point, so she was of course getting worried like any mother would. So she filed a missing persons report to the police. So of course the police started looking for her, but they didn't find anything. There was of course no evidence for Elisabeth's disappearance because she disappeared in her own home. There was nothing they could find to tell them any clues as to where she was or who abducted her. But about a month later, Joseph actually went to the police with a letter that they said showed up on their doorstep from Elisabeth, and he gave it to the police, and in this letter she wrote that she was tired of living with her parents and was staying with a friend. She also warned her parents not to come looking for her, otherwise she would leave the country. And this letter was actually had a post stamp which was from Brno, I can't say that word, but that's also in Austria. It's about a 2-hour drive away from their home, which is the actual place she was being kept. And Joseph actually forced Elisabeth to write this letter, and he forced her to write many other letters from then on. So Joseph actually told the police that she had probably run away to join a religious cult, which was apparently something she had mentioned before. So after more time searching from the police, from the family, the case kind of ran cold. There was no evidence that they could find to show where she was or who abducted her, so it kind of went a bit still, I guess. And also Joseph continued to tell them that she had probably run away to a religious cult, so why was there any point in trying to contact her, trying to find out where she actually was? So over the next 24 years, Joseph kept his daughter Elisabeth trapped in the basement just 20 feet below the rest of the family, which is absolutely insane to me. Like, 20 feet below, she could probably hear people walking around upstairs. Like, that is just heartbreaking. And Joseph would visit Elisabeth nearly every day. If it wasn't every day, it was at least 3 days a week, and he would bring her food and like other supplies, and would also repeatedly rape her. So by now you're probably wondering how Joseph was able to keep her down there without anybody else in the family knowing. I was very confused as well when I got to this point in the case, because I think many people know how to get to the basement of in their own house. So how did people not realise that there was somebody trapped down there? So in 1978, Joseph actually applied for a building permit for an extension on the basement of their house. And then in 1983, so about 5 years later, he applied for this permit. The building inspectors came to the house and told him that the basement had been built according to the dimensions that he'd put down on the permit. However, Joseph actually illegally enlarged the room by excavating space for a much larger basement, which was hidden by walls, so no one could really see it. And then in around 1981 or 1982, Joseph started to convert this into like a prison cell, where he installed a wash bin, a toilet, a bed, hot plate and refrigerator, so somebody could live there. So the hidden basement had a 5-meter long corridor, it had a storage space and also 3 small open cells. These were all connected by narrow passageways, and the basement also had a basic cooking area, bathroom facilities and 2 sleeping areas that each had 2 beds in them. Overall, the basement covered 55 meters square at the time of Elisabeth's discovery. So the area that Elisabeth was actually being held had 2 access points. One was a hinge door which weighed over 1,000 pounds, and the other a metal door which weighed around 650 pounds. And to get to where Elisabeth was being held in the basement, 8 doors total had to be unlocked, and 2 of which had an electronic locking code system, so you could only get in if you knew the right code. So the basement and the entrance to the basement was very, very well thought out, so only Joseph knew how to get in. People couldn't even find the first door, let alone get through 8 of them, so it was very well thought out, and of course it kind of worked because she was kept there for 24 years and nobody knew that she was down there. So over the 24 years of Elisabeth being held down there, she actually gave birth to 7 children, all of which Joseph was the father. In November of 1986, Elisabeth actually had a miscarriage at 10 weeks pregnant. On August 30th, 1988, Elisabeth had her first child, which was a baby girl named Kirsten. I think it's Kirsten, or it could be Kirsten. I think it's Kirsten, but I apologise if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Then on February 1st, 1990, the second child, Stefan, is born. The third child, Elisa, is born on August 29th, 1992. And in May of 1993, so when she was around 9 months old, she was found in a cardboard box outside on this family's doorstep, with a note in the box that was from Elisabeth, saying that she left her baby here and was asking for her parents to look after it as she couldn't look after it. And this was of course a note that Joseph forced Elisabeth to write. So after many requests by Elisabeth to make the basement bigger, as there was at this point there was obviously Elisabeth and then Kirsten and Stefan living down there, and then you had Joseph coming down every day. So there was a lot of people in there, and the basement at this point was around 35 meters square. So Elisabeth was constantly asking Joseph to make it bigger, to which he eventually agreed. I have no idea why, because he obviously shows no compassion, but he agreed to this. So over the next few years, Elisabeth and her children were put to work making the basement bigger. They actually had to dig out the soil with their bare hands, so they had to do all of the hard work themselves. So then in February 1994, the fourth child, Monica, is born, and then in December she's actually found outside the family's home in a stroller. And shortly after, Rosemary, who is Elisabeth's mum, receives a phone call from Elisabeth asking her to take care of Monica, and it's later assumed that Joseph actually just used recordings of Elisabeth to make this fake phone call. However, Rosemary was quite surprised as to how Elisabeth knew the family's phone number, because they had actually got a new phone number and it was unlisted. So I'm assuming by that it means it wasn't in any like phone books or whatever, so no one really knew what their new number was. So she was very surprised as to how Elisabeth knew it. So of course she reported this to police, but I couldn't find if anything actually happened from that. I'm assuming nothing really happened. So Elisabeth did teach all of her children to read and write. They had a television down there along with a radio and a cassette player. However, sometimes Joseph would turn off all the lights for like many days at a time, or wouldn't come down for quite a while to give them food, and this was his way of punishing them. So then in May of 1996, Elisabeth actually gave birth to 2 twin boys, and unfortunately around 2 days later, one of the boys actually died due to breathing issues that Joseph obviously knew about but refused to take him to seek any medical attention, because he just thought the baby would get over it, but unfortunately the baby did pass away. So Joseph removed the body and cremated it. The other twin, Alexander, was taken upstairs at around 15 months old and was found in similar circumstances to his other sisters. Then on December 16th, 2002, their 7th and last child, Felix, is born, and Joseph didn't take Felix upstairs because Rosemary could no longer care for any more children. Obviously she had 3 children up there already, so she couldn't care for any more, so he remained downstairs in the basement. Throughout their time here, Joseph would constantly tell Elisabeth and the 3 children who stayed in the basement that they would be gassed if they tried to escape, but this was like just a threat, because later on they found that there was no like gas supply found for the basement, so it was just like a threat to stop them trying to escape. He would also tell them that if they messed with the electronic door to try and get out, that they would be electrocuted and would die. So of course the children and Elisabeth were constantly terrified. Like, of course they were. They were trapped down there in this tiny living space with this horrible man who visited nearly every day, and it seemed like there was no way for them to ever escape. There was actually many people who rented rooms in the house upstairs above where Elisabeth was, and one man who rented one of the ground floors for around 12 years would constantly hear noises coming below him, which was of course Elisabeth and her children. And he would bring these up to Joseph, but he would just say that it was the faulty pipes or the heating system that was in the basement. So on April 19th, 2008, Kirsten, who was the oldest child, who was 19 at this point, which I think really puts into perspective as to how long Elisabeth was kept down there. She was 18 at the time she was trapped in the basement, and at this point her eldest daughter turned 19. So yeah, when she was around 19 she actually fell unconscious. So Elisabeth begged Joseph to take Kirsten to the hospital, and for some reason he agreed. So Elisabeth helped Joseph carry Kirsten upstairs, and she was put into an ambulance and taken to the hospital, but she was taken on her own. And of course Joseph forced Elisabeth to go back down to the basement afterwards. So Kirsten was actually admitted to hospital with life-threatening kidney failure, and shortly after she was admitted, Joseph arrived with a note written by Kirsten's mother, and he gave it to the doctor, and they discussed the note and Kirsten's condition. However, medical staff, after talking to Joseph and hearing his story about who Kirsten was and how he got the note from her mother, they became very suspicious of his story. So they alerted the police on April 21st, so like 2 days after Kirsten was admitted to hospital. The police then put out a public appeal for Kirsten's missing mother to come forward with Kirsten's medical history, so they could find out if there was anything else wrong with her and how to treat her. Of course, Elisabeth saw these appeals because she had access to a TV and radio. So she saw these and begged Joseph to take her to the hospital to see her daughter. And for some reason, again, he agreed to take her. So he drove her to the hospital, and shortly after the police arrived, because they received an anonymous tip-off that Joseph and Elisabeth were there. So they went to the hospital and detained them both. And sat Elisabeth down for questioning. At this point they kind of thought that Kirsten was subject to child abuse, because of course she was very malnourished, very ill looking. She was obviously going through a lot and wasn't being treated how a normal 19-year-old should. She didn't look like a normal 19-year-old, so they thought she was being subjected to child abuse. So they told that to Elisabeth and said that if she didn't answer their questions then she would be arrested for child abuse and Kirsten would be taken away from her. To which Elisabeth replied that she would only talk if she wouldn't have to see Joseph again. So the police agreed, and Elisabeth went on to tell them everything that had been happening for the past 24 years of her life. On April 26, 2008, 73-year-old Joseph was arrested. Then on March 19th, 2009, Joseph pled guilty to charges of the murder by negligence of his son/grandson, who was the twin that died, which was named Michael, as well as the decades of enslavement, incest, rape, coercion and false imprisonment of his daughter Elisabeth, and he was sentenced to life in prison. So he will never be getting out. Thank God for that, because he is honestly a disgusting human being that should never be able to see the light of day, because he trapped his own daughter in a basement for 24 years and did unspeakable things to her. So thank God that man's in prison and is no way on earth ever getting out. So after Joseph was arrested, of course, Elisabeth was reunited with all 6 of her children, so including the 3 that were taken upstairs, taken away from her at a very young age. She was reunited with them all, and also to her mother, Rosemary, and the rest of her family, which must have been difficult. I read that it was quite difficult for Elisabeth to forgive her mother for kind of giving up on her on the search for her quite early on, but of course she was being lied to every day by her husband as to where her daughter was, so it was very difficult for them all. But they are now living in a safe, secret house somewhere in Austria, and their identities are all protected. They are all going through different kinds of therapy for the trauma that they were put through for their lives. I read that the eldest son, Stefan, I think it was, yeah, Stefan, who was one of the sons being kept downstairs, he grew up to be around 5'8" and the basement itself was only, I think, 5'3" tall. So of course Stefan grew up with a hunch. He could never stand up straight because he didn't fit in the basement, so he always walked around with a hunch. So he went through I guess physiotherapy to get his back straightened up and how it should be. But yeah, everyone is doing really well. Elisabeth and all of her children are doing really well, as with Rosemary and the rest of the family. But yeah, that's all the information I have on this case. It's a lot of information. This case is huge, there's so much information on it, but I found it very interesting and just heartbreaking to read, really. But I'm so happy that they have all been found and they're all safe, and Joseph is locked away for the rest of his life, thank God. So if you enjoyed this video and you want me to do more of these true crime videos, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel down below. I hope you're having a lovely week and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys!